The first discordant sound was a choked, almost strangled whimper, carried on the otherwise placid, sun-dappled afternoon breeze, a sound so utterly alien, so jarringly out of place, amidst the usual cheerful, boisterous cacophony of the Willow Creek Community Park, that Captain Eva Rostova's head snapped up with a soldier's ingrained alertness, her blood running suddenly, inexplicably cold. She was walking briskly along the winding paved path towards the main playground structure to pick up her 8-year-old twin sons, Alex and Ben, from their supervised after-school park playdate, her mind still half occupied with the intricate details of a complex logistics briefing she'd just concluded at the nearby Fort Hays military base. Then came a more distinct, more desperate cry, unmistakably, Ben's voice high-pitched and strained with palpable distress. "No, please stop it. You're hurting us. Let us go." Eva broke into a dead run, her heavy regulation uniform boots pounding the unyielding pavement with urgent rhythmic thuds, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. As she rounded the vibrant green, meticulously trimmed privet hedge that bordered the designated play area, the scene that unfolded before her stopped her dead in her tracks, a wave of pure, unadulterated horror and a blinding, incandescent rage surging through her in equally overwhelming measure. Her sons, Alex and Ben, her boisterous, loving, vulnerable boys, were pinned rigidly to one of the heavy, dark-stained wooden park benches, their small bodies contorted into unnaturally still-strained positions. Wide, metallic silver strips of heavy-duty industrial-strength duct tape were wrapped cruelly tightly around their chests and upper arms, binding them mercilessly to the unforgiving solid wood of the bench. More layers of the same oppressive tape covered their mouths, effectively muffling their terrified cries into those terrible, choked, frightened whimpers she had first heard from a distance. Tears streamed in dirty rivulets down their flushed, terrified faces, their wide, expressive eyes, reflecting a traumatizing mixture of excruciating pain, bewildered confusion, and sheer, abject terror. Standing a few feet away from the tormented children, regarding her despicable handiwork with an almost obscene air of grim, deeply unsettling, smug satisfaction, was Karen Miller, the notoriously officious, universally disliked president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. In her manicured hand, she still held a nearly depleted telltale roll of the same silver duct tape. "What in the name of God do you think you're doing to my children?" Eva's voice was a low, dangerous, guttural snarl, the voice she usually reserved for addressing mutinous soldiers on the brink of riot, or for apprehending armed and dangerous suspects resisting arrest. Every instinct she possessed, both fiercely maternal and sharply professional, screamed for immediate, overwhelming, decisive action. Karen Miller turned slowly, her expression one of haughty, unassailable justification. Her lips pursed in a caricature of disapproval. "Oh, Captain Rostova, good, you're finally here. I am merely and with considerable effort restoring some desperately needed peace and order to this public space. Your children, as usual, were being excessively loud, wildly disruptive, and frankly, an intolerable menace to the other more considerate park users. They flagrantly refused to calm down or modulate their behavior when I repeatedly and very politely instructed them to do so, so I was unfortunately forced to take appropriate and, I believe, quite restrained measures to ensure their immediate compliance with established community standards of conduct." "Appropriate measures." Eva repeated her voice, dropping even further in pitch, becoming a barely audible tremor of concentrated fury that vibrated beneath the icy, almost preternatural calm she was desperately, almost physically, trying to maintain. "You call feloniously assaulting and unlawfully restraining my minor children with industrial tape appropriate measures." She was already moving forward with deliberate, controlled steps, her military training kicking in, automatically assessing the immediate situation, her children's physical and psychological safety, her absolute paramount concern. "Alex, Ben, Mommy's here now. It's okay. Don't struggle, boys. I'll get you free from this. Just breathe with me." Captain Eva Rostova was the highly respected, sometimes feared commanding officer of the 217th Military Police Battalion stationed at the sprawling Fort Hays, the major United States Army installation that bordered their ostensibly peaceful Willow Creek community. She was a decorated combat-proven officer, widely respected throughout the ranks for her sharp analytical intellect, her unwavering, almost legendary discipline, and her innate, unflappable ability to command effectively in the most extreme, high-stress, life-or-death situations. Her demanding days were typically filled with the complex, multifaceted responsibilities of maintaining law, order, and discipline on a large federal installation, rigorously training her MPs to the highest standards of readiness, liaising effectively with a myriad of civilian law enforcement agencies, and ensuring the overarching safety and security of thousands of military personnel, their families, and vital government assets. It was an all-consuming, often thankless job, but her most important, most cherished role, the one that truly defined her existence, was being a mother to Alex and Ben. The twins were bright, incredibly energetic, and deeply loving boys, the undisputed center of her universe. Alex had been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder (ADHD) at a young age. His energy was boundless, almost nuclear. His enthusiasm for life, infectious and often overwhelming, though it sometimes led to him being significantly louder and more physically demonstrative than other children his age. Ben, his slightly quieter twin, had a diagnosed sensory processing disorder that, particularly when he was overstimulated, excited, or distressed, could manifest in loud, repetitive vocalizations, often humming, shrieking, or echoing phrases, and a profound, sometimes desperate need for vigorous, almost constant physical play to self-regulate his overloaded nervous system. They were not bad or naughty children, as Karen Miller often implied. They were children with specific, well-documented neurological differences needs that Eva and her supportive husband Mark, a brilliant civilian software engineer, worked tirelessly and patiently to support and manage with unconditional love, unwavering patience, professional therapeutic guidance, and carefully structured routines. The Willow Creek Community Park, with its expansive green spaces and modern play structures, was supposed to be their safe haven, a designated place where they could joyfully and safely burn off their excess energy, attempt to socialize with their peers, and just be kids free from the judgment and constraints they sometimes faced elsewhere. It was a community amenity promised to all residents upon purchasing their homes, a shared space intended for recreation and enjoyment. Karen Miller, however, in her capacity as HOA president, seemed to view it, and indeed all common areas, as her personal, meticulously regulated fiefdom. She had a long, well-documented history of complaints against the Rostova children, and indeed against any children she deemed too noisy, unruly, or simply not conforming to her standards. Sternly worded letters typed on official-looking HOA letterhead and citing obscure, often selectively interpreted HOA bylaws about excessive noise emissions, uncontrolled recreational activities, and even inappropriate use of playground equipment were frequent and unwelcome arrivals in the Rostova mailbox. Eva had always addressed these complaints politely but firmly, patiently, explaining her children's specific needs and behaviors, assuring Mrs. Miller they were always closely supervised by a responsible adult, and pointing out with unassailable logic that a community park was by its very nature a place intended for children to play, to laugh, to be themselves. She had perhaps naively dismissed Karen's relentless complaints as the bitter, intolerant grumblings of an unhappy, power-obsessed woman with too much time on her hands. She had never, in her darkest, most unimaginable nightmares, conceived that Karen would or could escalate her petty tyranny to actual physical assault against defenseless children. They simply wouldn't listen to reason, Captain Rostova. Karen Miller was saying, her voice dripping with a smug, infuriating condescension, as Eva carefully, with excruciating gentleness, began to peel the thick, brutally sticky binding layers of duct tape from Alex's small, trembling arm. Eva's trained fingers noted with a surge of cold fury the angry raised red welts and developing abrasions already clearly visible on his delicate pale skin. They were shrieking like banshees, running completely wild, deliberately disturbing poor Mr. Henderson's much-needed afternoon nap in his own home. This park is for everyone's enjoyment, Captain, not just for children who clearly cannot control themselves or their impulses. The unspoken venomous implication, the palpable disdain for her children's inherent disabilities, hung heavy, ugly, and suffocating in the otherwise pleasant afternoon air. My children have every conceivable right to be in this public park, Mrs. Miller, just like any other child. Eva said, her voice now a blade of pure, polished ice. She worked methodically with a surgeon's precision, freeing Alex first from the brutal restraints, then moving immediately to a sobbing Ben, her heart physically aching with a profound, almost unbearable pain at the terrified, animalistic sobs now escaping their finely uncovered mouths. And you, madam, have no right, absolutely, no legal or moral right, to lay a single hand on them, let alone to restrain them in this barbaric medieval fashion. I am the duly elected president of this homeowners association, Karen declared, puffing out her chest in a ludicrous display of self-importance, as if that title granted her immunity from basic laws of assault. I have a fiduciary duty to maintain decorum and uphold community standards. You have a duty, Mrs. Miller, to obey the laws of this state and this country. Ava countered her gaze, flinty, her military bearing asserting itself despite her inner turmoil. Once her sons were finally free from the tape, though still shaking uncontrollably and sobbing hysterically, clinging to her legs with desperate strength, she pulled out her military-issued encrypted cell phone. Her first call, crucially, was not to her own military police battalion, not yet. Her first call as a commissioned, uniformed law enforcement officer directly witnessing a violent crime being committed against her own children was to the civilian authorities who had primary jurisdiction in the Willow Creek subdivision. This is Captain Ava Rostova, United States Army Military Police, Fort Hays. She stated clearly, her voice crisp, professional, and devoid of any audible emotion, giving her exact location within the park. I am reporting an active, in-progress child endangerment situation, aggravated assault, and felony unlawful imprisonment of 2 minor children. The adult female suspect is still on scene and is currently being detained by me. I require immediate local law enforcement and emergency medical services response to my location. Priority 1. She then made a second, equally brief, but no less urgent call, this one, to her battalion duty officer at Fort Hays, Major Tompkins. Major Tompkins, this is Captain Rostova. I am currently off post at the Willow Creek Community Park, adjacent to Sector Gamma housing. There has been a serious, actionable incident involving my dependent children. I have already notified Willow Creek Civilian PD, and they are en route. Given that the victims are military dependents and the egregious nature of the offense, I am formally requesting you immediately initiate MP liaison protocol with all responding civilian units. Have a designated MP patrol meet them at the park's main entrance on Sycamore Drive for necessary coordination and potential assistance. And I need you to notify the Staff Judge Advocate's Office without delay. We may have significant federal jurisdictional implications here, potentially involving civil rights violations. Her training, ingrained over years of service, was absolute instinctual. She was already documenting the scene in her mind, preserving vital evidence with her observations, ensuring that all correct legal and operational procedures were being meticulously followed, even as a violent, chaotic storm of maternal fury, profound anguish, and a burning desire for retribution raged within her. The sight of the carelessly discarded roll of silver duct tape lying on the grass, the angry red marks already blooming into ugly purple bruises on her children's tender skin, their tear-streaked, terrified faces. These images would be seared, branded into her memory for eternity. Within minutes, the deceptive quiet of the suburban afternoon was utterly shattered by the rapidly approaching discordant wail of multiple sirens. 2 Willow Creek Police Department cruisers arrived first, their emergency lights painting the scene in frantic, flashing strobes of red and blue, followed closely by a fully equipped paramedic unit. Shortly thereafter, an imposing MP patrol vehicle from Fort Hays, its markings clearly visible, pulled up discreetly, but purposefully, its very presence, a clear, unmistakable indicator of the seriousness with which the United States military viewed incidents involving their personnel and their families, especially when children were the victims. Officer Davies, the senior WCPD officer on scene, a man Eva knew and respected from several previous interagency training briefings and local emergency preparedness meetings, approached her cautiously, his expression grim and deeply concerned as he took in the entire horrific scene. The obviously distressed, weeping children, the discarded pieces of duct tape, the stony-faced, uniformed MP captain. Captain Rostova, can you tell me exactly what happened here? Eva recounted the horrifying events succinctly with painstaking professional accuracy, her voice remarkably tight and controlled, though edged with an emotion that was clearly and understandably profound. As she spoke, The paramedics gently, compassionately examined Alex and Ben, checking for physical injuries beyond the obvious abrasions, their soft, reassuring voices, a stark, welcome contrast to the inherent harshness and cruelty of the situation. Karen Miller, seeing the formidable array of law enforcement now assembled, and perhaps finally sensing the gravity of her miscalculation, began to bluster loudly, her voice rising in pitch. "This is a completely ridiculous theatrical overreaction. I was merely instilling some much-needed discipline. These children were utterly out of control. Their mother, despite her supposed rank, clearly can't manage them properly." "Ma'am," Officer Davies said, his voice firm, his patience clearly wearing thin, "you are alleged to have physically restrained 2 minor children against their will using industrial duct tape. That is an extremely serious accusation with potentially severe legal consequences. We'll need to take your formal statement regarding these allegations." "My statement, I am the victim here." "Forita," Karen shrieked, her eyes darting nervously, almost wildly between the civilian police officers and the stoic uniformed military policemen who now stood observing the unfolding scene, their disciplined presence a silent but undeniably powerful statement of unwavering support for their commanding officer and her traumatized family. As Officer Davies began to formally question Karen Miller, who was becoming increasingly agitated, irrational, and belligerent in her denials and accusations, other parents and local residents, drawn by the escalating commotion and the sight of multiple emergency vehicles, began to gather at a safe distance. Horrified whispers quickly turned into audible gasps of disbelief and outrage as the basic facts of the incident spread through the growing crowd. One mother, a Mrs. Chen, whose young son was also on the autism spectrum and sometimes played loudly or exhibited behaviors that Karen Miller had previously complained about, stepped forward hesitantly, her face pale with a mixture of fear and newfound courage. She did something somewhat similar to my son Daniel last month." Mrs. Chen said, her voice trembling almost uncontrollably, but her words clear. "Not with duct tape, thank God, but she actually locked him in the park's dark equipment shed for nearly 10 minutes because he was having a sensory meltdown and couldn't be quiet when she yelled at him. I was too scared, too intimidated by her threats to report it to anyone at the time. She threatened to get the HOA to find me into bankruptcy if I ever spoke of it." Another resident, an elderly, respected gentleman named Mr. Rodriguez, who often sat on a nearby bench, reading, added his own disturbing account, his voice filled with righteous indignation. "She's always been like this about children, especially if they make any noise at all. She complained bitterly when my own grandchildren visited from out of state. Last summer said their innocent laughter was piercing and intolerable. She even tried to get the HOA to formally ban anyone under the age of 16 from using the community pool during what she called adult quiet swim hours, which quite conveniently for her, she arbitrarily defined as all daylight hours from sunup to sundown." A clear, undeniable, and deeply chilling pattern of Karen Miller's escalating intolerance, her obsessive need for control, and her targeted abuse of power began to emerge with damning clarity from the impromptu testimonies, painting a frightening picture for everyone present. The brutal duct taping of Alex and Ben was clearly not an isolated, impulsive act of frustration. It was the horrifying, predictable culmination of a long-standing, calculated campaign of harassment, intimidation, and outright cruelty against the community's children, particularly those children she deemed different, defective, or problematic for her idealized, sterile vision of Willow Creek. The military police patrol, under the calm and professional direction of a young but highly competent Sergeant Miller, pointedly no relation to Karen, liaised seamlessly with Officer Davies and the WCPD, offering logistical assistance in securing the expanding crime scene and taking preliminary statements from any military-affiliated witnesses who might have observed the incident, operating strictly within the clearly defined bounds of their jurisdictional authority and existing mutual aid agreements between the civilian police and the military installation. Eva, having given her comprehensive initial statement to Officer Davies, focused entirely on her traumatized children, holding them close, murmuring soft words of comfort and reassurance, her heart aching with a pain far deeper, far more profound than any physical injury she had ever endured in her own military career. The angry red welts on their small arms and chests from the brutal application and removal of the duct tape were already beginning to darken into ugly, painful bruises. The invisible emotional scars she knew with a mother's certainty would take much, much longer to heal, if they ever truly did. The following days were an almost unbearable maelstrom of intense activity and emotional upheaval. Alex and Ben were thoroughly medically examined by their pediatrician and by a specialist at the base hospital. The physical marks, abrasions, and contusions were meticulously documented with clinical photographs, and they began the difficult process of speaking with a highly recommended child psychologist specializing in acute trauma and abuse. Eva and Mark were interviewed extensively separately and together by WCPD detectives, and then more formally by senior investigators from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division CID, a development that underscored the potential gravity of federal charges given the direct involvement of military dependents as victims and the possible violation of specific federal statutes protecting children or relating to civil rights violations on community property that had established ties to federal housing agreements or Department of Defense funding programs. The Willow Creek HOA Board, a disparate collection of mostly passive, uninvolved individuals who had long been content to let the domineering Karen Miller run roughshod over the community and its bylaws as long as their own quiet, comfortable lives weren't unduly disturbed, found themselves abruptly thrust into a full-blown crisis they were wholly unprepared and ill-equipped to handle. Initially, in a display of profound ineptitude and moral cowardice, they attempted to downplay the severity of the incident, issuing a weak, lawyer-vetted, and utterly inadequate public statement referring to an unfortunate misunderstanding in the park, and vaguely promising a thorough internal review of park policies. This pathetic attempt at damage control only fueled the already incandescent outrage of the Willow Creek community, who saw it as a blatant attempt to protect Karen Miller and the HOA itself from accountability. The first truly shocking event that galvanized the broader community beyond Willow Creek and significantly escalated the legal jeopardy for both Karen Miller and the complicit HOA was the public discovery through a court-sanctioned search of Karen Miller's meticulously kept, almost obsessively detailed, community nuisance log. A legally executed warrant served on her home as part of the rapidly expanding police investigation uncovered a disturbing series of spiral-bound notebooks in which she had, with chilling dedication, obsessively documented for several years the perceived infractions, violations, and annoyances of numerous residents with a particular, almost pathological focus on children. The entries concerning Alex and Ben Rostova were chillingly detailed, filled with angry, intolerant, and deeply prejudiced language about their uncontrolled shrieking, hyperactive destructive movements, and what she repeatedly termed their parents' blatant negligence and refusal to discipline. There were even crude, hand-drawn sketches of the park layout with specific notations about where the Rostova children frequently played and what she deemed optimal positions for covert observation and documentation. More disturbingly, the log contained numerous detailed entries about other children in the neighborhood, including Mrs. Chen's son, Daniel, with cold clinical notes like, subject to Chen boy autistic, confined to equipment shed 1430, 1440 hours, 15 oct. Effect, temporary silence and compliance achieved. Method appears effective for short-term behavioral modification. This was irrefutable, horrifying evidence, not just of her deep-seated animosity and prejudice, but of multiple premeditated acts of unlawful confinement, child abuse, and a clear, undeniable pattern of escalating, dangerously abusive behavior. She had even meticulously cross-referenced some of her handwritten log entries with copies of the official HOA violation warnings she had formally issued to the families involved, creating a damning, incontrovertible paper trail of her personal vendetta and her abuse of power. The second shocking development, which further inflamed public opinion and tightened the legal noose, was the courageous emergence of a whistleblower from within the HOA's own contracted management company. A junior administrative assistant, deeply horrified by the news of the duct-taping incident and burdened by her conscience, anonymously leaked a series of highly incriminating internal emails to a tenacious local investigative reporter known for exposing corruption. These explosive emails revealed beyond any shadow of a doubt that several senior HOA board members had been fully aware of Karen Miller's unconventional and sometimes aggressive methods of dealing with problem children and neighborhood nuisances for at least a year prior to the attack on Alex and Ben. While some board members had expressed vague private misgivings in the email chains, none had ever formally challenged her authority, reported her abusive actions to law enforcement, or taken any steps to remove her from her position of power. They had, it appeared, either feared her vindictive wrath or, more cynically, believed her to be effective in maintaining property values and keeping things orderly by successfully intimidating residents into silence and compliance. One particularly damning email from a prominent board member even explicitly praised Karen for her proactive and decisive approach to mitigating community disturbances and preserving our neighborhood's tranquility. This painted a clear, unambiguous picture of profound HOA board complicity, gross negligence, and a shocking dereliction of their fiduciary and moral duties to protect all residents, especially the most vulnerable. The critical midpoint twist in this sordid saga arrived with a formal announcement from the Staff Judge Advocate's SJA office at Fort Hays, delivered in conjunction with a statement from the Regional U.S. Attorney's Office. After a thorough review of the applicable statutes and the specifics of the case, they determined that because the Willow Creek subdivision was a designated military housing partner community, meaning a certain percentage of its residents were active-duty military families, and because the community, including its park and recreational facilities, received certain federal grants for infrastructure development, family support programs, and disability access improvements, Karen Miller's targeted actions against military dependents, particularly those children with documented disabilities like Alex and Ben, could indeed constitute serious federal offenses. These potential charges included but were not limited to violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA federal hate crime statutes, if discriminatory intent could be proven, and specific civil rights statutes related to unlawful restraint assault and endangerment of minors on property with federal oversight or funding ties. Furthermore, the fact that she had physically assaulted the dependent children of a commissioned military officer in a manner that could potentially be construed as attempting to intimidate or improperly influence that officer in the performance of her duties, even if that was not her primary conscious intent, raised additional complex federal legal questions that investigators were keenly pursuing. Suddenly, this was no longer just a local police matter concerning assault and battery. The full formidable weight of the federal justice system with its vast resources and severe penalties was now a looming, undeniable reality. Karen Miller had not just duct-taped 2 innocent children in a fit of rage. She had, it appeared, committed multiple serious federal crimes, and the HOA's blatant negligence and now exposed complicity could expose them to massive civil lawsuits and potentially crippling federal financial penalties and sanctions. The dramatic climax of the Willow Creek saga occurred not in a courtroom, but at a tense, emotionally charged emergency town hall meeting demanded by the thoroughly outraged and now fully mobilized residents of the community. The meeting was held in the packed, sweltering gymnasium of the local elementary school, the only venue large enough to accommodate the unprecedented turnout. The atmosphere inside was electric, a volatile, combustible mix of raw anger, lingering fear, profound sadness, and a desperate collective yearning for justice, for accountability, for healing. Eva Rostova, dressed impeccably in her Army Class A service uniform, her chest adorned with her service ribbons and commendations, stood resolute at the makeshift podium. She was there not primarily as a grieving, vengeful mother, though that maternal fire burned fiercely within her, but as Captain Rostova, a commissioned officer of the United States Army, and as an appointed representative of the numerous military families who had been systematically targeted and terrorized by Karen Miller's reign. Her husband, Mark, his face a grim mask of unwavering support, sat in the front row. Alex and Ben, on the advice of their therapist, were not present. The potential for re-traumatization was deemed too great, but their small, brave presence was felt in every carefully chosen word Eva spoke, in every heart in that crowded room. Karen Miller was also there as mandated by her bail conditions, flanked by her expensive-looking stone-faced lawyer, her own face a bizarre, unconvincing mask of defiant indignation and aggrieved victimhood. The remaining deeply disgraced HOA board members sat huddled together at a long table on the stage, looking pale-harried and utterly terrified as they faced the palpable wrath of their community. "My children." Eva began, her voice clear, steady, and ringing, with an undeniable moral authority that commanded absolute pin-drop silence in the cavernous gymnasium were brutally assaulted in a public park, a place where they, like all children, should have felt completely safe and free to be themselves. They were bound and gagged, subjected to terror and pain by an individual who systematically and with premeditation abused her position of trust and authority within this community for her own twisted purposes. Zhao. She then methodically, dispassionately recounted Karen Miller's documented history of escalating complaints against her sons and other children, the horrifying discovery of the nuisance log with its cold, clinical documentation of abuse, and the irrefutable evidence of the HOA board's gross negligence and active complicity. This was not an isolated incident, not a momentary lapse of judgment. This was a calculated pattern of escalating abuse, of profound intolerance, and of deliberate intimidation, allowed to fester and grow by an HOA board that prioritized a distorted notion of silence over safety, a perverse ideal of conformity over basic human compassion. Karen Miller's lawyer, a slick, aggressive man in a tailored suit, immediately interjected, loudly accusing Captain Rostova of shamefully using her military position and influence to orchestrate a vindictive witch hunt against his client. He further claimed that Karen Miller was merely a dedicated, concerned citizen, courageously trying to uphold decent community standards in the face of unruly, out-of-control children and their permissive, irresponsible parents. Karen herself then seized the microphone from her lawyer, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical crescendo. Those children are a menace to civilized society. They are loud, destructive, and their parents clearly refuse to control them. I did what was absolutely necessary to protect this community, to protect our property values, to protect our peace and quiet from their incessant chaos. I am the true victim here, persecuted for trying to do the right thing. Her delusional, self-pitying words were met with a deafening, overwhelming chorus of boos, catcalls, and furious shouts of "shame on you" and "monster." Then a calm, authoritative figure from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a stern-faced, impeccably dressed assistant U.S. attorney named Ms. Albright, calmly approached the podium. Mrs. Karen Miller. She stated, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion, but carrying the full weight of federal law, given the extensive and compelling evidence uncovered by local, state, and federal investigators in this matter, including clear and egregious violations of multiple federal statutes protecting individuals with disabilities and ensuring the safety and civil rights of military dependents in federally designated housing areas. My office is, as of this afternoon, formally filing a multi-count federal indictment against you. These charges include, but are not limited to, conspiracy to interfere with civil rights, multiple counts of aggravated assault on a minor, and felony unlawful restraint. Furthermore, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the now ashen-faced HOA board members. The Homeowners Association of Willow Creek as an entity is now officially under active federal investigation for gross negligence, financial irregularities, and potential criminal complicity in these heinous acts. A stunned, almost disbelieving silence fell over the entire gymnasium, broken only by Karen Miller's strangled, choked gasp and the distinct audible click of Officer Davies producing a pair of handcuffs. The HOA board members looked as if they were about to collectively faint. The full, awesome, and relentless weight of the United States federal government had just descended upon their mismanaged, corrupt little kingdom. Eva Rostova simply stood tall, her expression unyielding, her duty done. Justice, it seemed comprehensive and far-reaching, was finally decisively on its way. The falling action in the aftermath of that explosive town hall meeting was both swift and satisfyingly decisive. Karen Miller was arrested by federal agents in full view of the departing town hall attendees and news cameras the following morning. Facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the damning testimonies of multiple victims, and the prospect of a lengthy, harsh federal prison sentence with no possibility of parole, her arrogant defiance finally completely crumbled. Her subsequent trial was a regional media sensation, relentlessly highlighting the egregious, unchecked abuse of power that could fester within an improperly managed homeowners association. She was ultimately found guilty on multiple federal and state charges by a jury that deliberated for less than 2 hours, and she received a sentence that unequivocally reflected the profound severity and cruelty of her crimes against vulnerable, disabled children. Her personal assets were frozen by court order, and a significant portion was later awarded to the families of her victims, including the Rostova twins in a series of successful civil lawsuits. The Willow Creek HOA as an organization was effectively and permanently dismantled by the ensuing federal investigation and subsequent court orders. A federally appointed receiver took over its chaotic operations, tasked with the monumental job of untangling its convoluted finances, addressing its staggering legal and civil liabilities, and working collaboratively with the now empowered residents to establish a new, truly representative, transparent, and accountable community association from the ground up. The infamous nuisance log and the damning leaked emails became central pieces of evidence in multiple costly civil lawsuits that ultimately bankrupted the old corrupt HOA and forced comprehensive fundamental reforms, not just in Willow Creek, but as a model for other communities. The highly publicized case became a significant watershed moment for HOA oversight and governance reform across the entire state, and it even garnered considerable national attention, sparking a much-needed debate about the balance of power between HOAs and individual residents' rights. State legislators, spurred by intense public outrage and effective lobbying from a coalition of child advocacy groups, disability rights organizations, and military family support networks, successfully passed a landmark piece of legislation popularly known as Alex and Ben's Law. This comprehensive bill significantly strengthened legal protections for all residents in HOA-managed communities, mandated regular certified training for all HOA board members on civil rights, disability awareness, and conflict resolution, and established clear, robust, and independent state-level mechanisms for reporting and thoroughly investigating any alleged abuses of HOA power. For the Rostova family, the difficult, painful journey to healing was long and arduous. Alex and Ben received extensive specialized therapy to help them cope with the profound trauma of the assault and the violation of their safety. The Willow Creek community, however, chastened and unified, rallied around them with an overwhelming, heartfelt outpouring of support, love, and practical assistance. The park, once a place of unimaginable fear and pain, was slowly, lovingly reclaimed by the children. Residents organized inclusive community playdates, planted a beautiful children's peace garden with a plaque dedicating it to resilience and kindness, and installed a brightly colored buddy bench near the playground as enduring symbols of inclusivity, acceptance, and safety for all. Captain Eva Rostova, while widely and deservedly praised for her extraordinary courage, her unwavering composure, and her principled actions, consistently emphasized that her response was not primarily that of a vengeful mother seeking retribution, but rather that of a dedicated law enforcement officer, upholding her solemn oath to protect and serve all members of the community, and as a fiercely protective parent, absolutely determined to ensure that no other child anywhere would ever have to suffer as hers had. She became a respected, articulate, and passionate advocate for military families facing similar challenges and injustices in civilian communities across the country, her powerful voice carrying the unmistakable weight of hard-won experience and unimpeachable moral authority. Months later, on a bright, breezy spring afternoon, Eva stood quietly at the edge of the newly refurbished Willow Creek Park, watching Alex and Ben. They were laughing again, their joyous, unrestrained shouts echoing through the trees, their play energetic and free, though a new subtle wariness, a learned caution, still sometimes lingered in their young eyes when unfamiliar adults approached too quickly. But they were healing demonstrably, healing surrounded by a community that was now more vigilant, more compassionate, more deeply united, and more fiercely protective of its children than ever before. Mrs. Chen's son Daniel was playing animatedly with them, his own happy laughter now free, loud, and uninhibited. The HOA had new democratically elected leadership individuals chosen by the residents for their integrity and commitment to service, with Eva herself serving willingly as an unpaid volunteer advisor on community safety, inclusivity, and emergency preparedness. The chilling metallic silver glint of duct tape would forever remain a dark, indelible memory for Eva, a reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. But the astonishing, inspiring resilience of her brave children, the unwavering, unconditional support of her loving husband and her transformed community, and the sweeping positive societal changes born from their family's terrible ordeal were a powerful, enduring testament to the unrelenting power of justice. the profound strength of a mother's protective love, and the remarkable capacity for good that can emerge even from the deepest darkness. The ugly, painful echoes of that horrific afternoon in the park had in the end brought about a resounding, uplifting chorus of positive, lasting change, ensuring that the furtive whispers of fear and intimidation were definitively replaced by the confident, joyful voices of a protected, empowered, and finally truly safe community.